And we're live. Hello, you viewers.
Hey!
This is Smoking Issues, and for once in our lives, let me get what I want this time.
You can't always get what you want,
but you got what you need.
but if you try sometimes,
You just might find get what you need. Please, 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 let me get what I want this time.
Let me get what I want. Ian's already serenading with the Smiths. No, this is not starting off well.
It's not starting off well. We are Smoking Issues, and we are in person tonight. Yes. Josh made the trip purely for this show, and no other reason at all.
No other reason at all. Not like I had a wedding I was officiating or anything.
No. For this show. I mean, weddings are neither here nor there, but Smoking Issues is really where the real priority
is. It's really the most monumental thing to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a monumental day, and we have some very monumental cigars to explore today.
Yeah, so Ian, why don't you introduce what we're talking about with our Smoking Issue today?
Okay.
Pull up the notes.
Well, today is our you know how like when you have like a new TV show, so season 1, they do the pilot and do the first plot real quick in the first 4 episodes. And then they kind of like slow the plot right down to introduce all the characters and do some character development, before they ramp up the rest of the season. Well, this is that. God. We've done the first 4 episodes. It's been heated. It's been exciting. It's very exciting. But this episode, what we are doing is we are exploring our own stories and the smoking issues which have been present in our lives.
Yeah.
As we've been young men in the church and in education and in our careers.
Yeah.
And the various smoking issues that have come up. So you might hear some old smoking issues, dancing, movies, burning CDs.
Tossing the stick in the fire at the recommitment ceremony when you were a child.
Nailing your deepest dark.
Yeah, to the cross.
To the cross.
That's my mind.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. Awesome.
All those kind of things.
How many times did you do that?
Oh, at least yearly.
It was almost yearly for me too.
Yeah.
Both in youth group and in regular church as well.
How many times was it about porn?
Every time. It was every single time. It was like, maybe there's a theme here. Maybe this isn't working if I keep having to nail the thing to the cross. Yeah. And then you get to like, maybe you don't need to do that anymore. Well, we'll get into that later. All right. So we have a really special thing. So last week I was saying I was withholding the cigar that I was smoking, and saying that it was to come this week. So when Ian and I are in person, Ian, here you go. This is a Monte Cristo Havana. So these are Cuban cigars. They're called the full name is the Monte Cristo Open Regatta, and they are from Cuba, exported to England. And Ian, I paid you some pretty good money to bring these over, didn't I?
Yes.
And it's been awesome. We've been getting a lot of runs from this. And I bought these actually smaller. I would have preferred like Churchill, which would have been 7 inches. And every single time. And the girth would have been 55 ring size.
That's like a Magnum XL, isn't it?
Pretty much. Were you looking through my bag?
Oh wow.
We're done. Oh man, I don't even know what to say about that. Yeah. So anyway, so these are Cubans. They're full-bodied strength. They're a little over 5 inches.
Now you're just doing this yourself.
I am. I go to it now. They're a little over 5 inches, and they're 46 ring size. So that's what we're really excited about this. They are Cubans. They're really special. And I would have preferred, like I said, probably something a bit larger.
Mm-hmm. What's the difference, Sam? What?
It's a longer smoke, so you get a little bit more bang for your buck when you smoke a larger cigar. You can enjoy it longer. Sometimes you can stretch your cigar out to almost 2 hours if you do it correctly.
As we do every single week with our podcast.
Yes, we do. Yes, that's absolutely true. But I got these smaller so that I could share them, because the larger ones as well, if you have a larger ring size, so it's larger in diameter, you get more smoke per draw.
Yeah.
And that can be very challenging for people who don't typically smoke cigars.
Yes.
So I chose to get the smaller ones so I can share them, because I've smoked Cuban cigars since I was about 17 years old. and I want people that hadn't had the opportunity to smoke them to be able to smoke them in the joint.
Yes.
So, a couple of facts about these. Well, actually, this is all that there is. I will say this: I've been to Cuba 3 times.
Yeah.
We have. I smoked cigars in Cuba. I've had cigars brought over. Most Cuban cigars that are exported are not the highest quality tobacco.
Oh yeah.
They keep the highest quality in country to encourage people to come to the country and smoke.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the idea. So what we're smoking today is a Cuban. You can smell a Cuban. You can smell it. What were you getting when you started smelling this?
Sweet.
Very sweet. There's
Very
a little bit of
sweet.
sourness to it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. A certain musk.
Yep. There's some notes of wood to it as well.
Yeah.
A darker wood, like an oak.
Like an oak, sweet. There's just nothing quite like a Cuban. You are right.
Yeah, it's
right.
amazing.
It's less spicy, less peppery, in my opinion. Much sweeter, and just so compelling.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing like a Cuban, and we love cigars, and I'm really privileged to be able to smoke with you today, man. This is great. This is going to be live, man.
Smoking Issues live.
This is fantastic. So,
fantastic.
Ian, you want to? Why don't you light up first, and I'll just share a little bit more about the Cubans. So with these, they're designed to be more of an everyman smoke. They're kind of the everyman's Cuban. So if you were to go by a Cubano or Romeo and Julieta, those are going to be a bit stronger. And these are going to be strong. This is definitely strong. Cubans are always strong cigars. However, it smells so good, dude. It smells amazing. But these were designed to kind of be more the everyman's Cuban cigar. So they're not going to be as strong.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to be as potent. They're not going to be
floral.
Actually,
getting that as well now.
Yeah.
Like a bouquet of flowers.
Yeah, they're not.
Fresh cut.
Yeah, they're not going to be as potent or strong. A couple other interesting things with Cubans as well. So when you get the box of Cubans, they typically have a seal on them that is only made in Cuba, and so you want that seal to be unbroken. Because a lot of times what people will do is they'll switch out the cigars with like Dominicans or Ecuadorian cigars and try to pass them off as Cubans. Mm-hmm. And so I only buy cigars fresh out of the box when you have broken the seal yourself. Mm-hmm. Additionally, what makes Cuban cigars so good, many different reasons, the region, where it is in relation to the equator, the amount of sun it gets, but also there's a lot of these cigars, I've been to the cigars, I've been to the tobacco fields, and there's a mist that rises up at almost every morning because of the humidity levels and because of where it is on the equator. When the tobacco is in season, there's typically most of the tobacco fields are valleys, and so a mist rises up in the morning, and it actually is pulling some of the nutrients up from the ground, and it's also giving it, instead of that harsh rain that drives, it's giving the tobacco the moisture it needs
without damaging the plant.
Exactly, and sometimes when it rains pretty heavily, it'll drive the nutrients further into the soil, whereas if the bulk of your moisture comes from the mist that rises, it actually keeps the nutrients at the top of the soil.
Okay.
So those are just some interesting facts, some good things to know as to what makes a Cuban, and you can't ever mistake it. Once you smell it, you just know that this is a Cuban. So I'm gonna light mine.
I'm gonna share the old video link on my Facebook.
Oh, perfect.
To see if anybody else will join us. Thank you, those who have joined us for this live broadcast. You're always welcome here. Smoking Issues welcomes you.
As we do all of the wonderful God's creatures.
Yes, indeed.
That didn't happen.
I don't know. It was trying to be a riff on the Episcopal Church welcomes you. Share. How was that?
It was good. You get that little shock when you first inhale.
Yeah.
Draw.
Okay. Now, our issue today is our own life. As he said,
that's a pretty big issue.
Our lives have been big issues. So let's get started. Josh, I've heard a bit of your story in the past, but why don't you tell me a bit about yourself?
Yeah, well,
do you camera often.
Oh, God, creepy. You can only appreciate that when it's live, okay? When it's live, it's super creepy. Especially with that weird face with the hair poof.
And the white t-shirt, the skinny jeans, it's just so...
And the arm, like, awkwardly leaning against the brick wall.
Yeah, anyway, carry on.
We didn't talk quite about this too much, but like Ian had mentioned, we are the smoking issues. Like, there's constantly issues that everybody has in their own life, backgrounds, and upbringing. And so I was born and raised in Maryland, and I had a really interesting. I was adopted when I was 3 days old. So my biological mother has 4 children from 3 different men. And my biological father, she had only been dating a few months.
Uh-huh.
And I was told, I had some half-siblings that contacted me about 8 years ago, and I was told by them, they remembered what he looked like, and that he looked like a 6'6" version of Yosemite Sam. In the cartoon, Yosemite Sam.
Yeah, nice.
He had a big beard, he was a full-blooded Irishman, he's 6'6". And so my...
And so you've been desiring to emulate him ever since?
No, definitely not. So I was adopted when I was 3 days old, and my growing up was actually fairly good growing up. Both my parents were followers of Jesus. They were a bit older too, so my parents were like in their mid-30s when I was born.
Uh-huh.
So my parents approached parenting. I was an only child, but and so they kind of were like winging it at times, but. They approached it from a bit of a more mature perspective than a lot of more younger parents do. So my dad prayed for 3 things when I was a baby. And actually, listeners who heard we share my testimony before, it's typically hearing me say this. My dad prayed that I'd get saved at a young age, that I'd know what God wanted me to do with my life at a young age,
Yep.
and that God would prepare the heart of someone for me to marry, and that we would both stay pure until marriage. And that was my dad's prayer for me as I was a baby. Actually, even before I was born, they had planned on adopting me from this woman. And so they knew that I was coming months before I was born.
Josh, you're not even saved. So has there any progress on any of the press?
What is that passage in Romans 13? You've said it before. When someone asks you, are you saved, or do you know where you're going when you die? Paul says, I am certain that salvation is nearer to me now than when I first believed.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So that's interesting. So following my early life followed the pattern of my dad's prayer. I came to a knowledge of who Jesus was, I believe a saving knowledge of who Jesus was, when I was 4 years old. So, and it was kind of of my own volition. I was in a traditional Baptist church. So you'd go and you'd have Sunday school. You go sit. I sat between my mom and dad, and I listened, and I was disciplined when I didn't. So we went every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night. I went with my father from the time I was 4 or 5 years old, like doing deacon visits on Thursdays, special prayer meetings, revivals, that whole thing. So I was in church probably at least 5 or 6 times a week.
Well, so say that whole thing. This is a culture that is quite unique and very unfamiliar, particularly to our British viewers and listeners.
Really?
Yeah, this is not in any way a particularly familiar pattern of church. It's pretty uniquely American.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So can you sort of describe? You say, as you well know, we don't know. Tell us what.
Okay.
What is saving knowledge of Jesus? What's the understanding behind that? What is church? What are you doing?
Yeah. So believing that you are a sinner, that Jesus is the only way to become saved and to get to heaven. That was the baseline for my 4-year-old self.
Okay.
That I can't get to heaven unless I believe in Jesus and give my life to him. I didn't quite understand what that meant, but I need to pray and acknowledge that I'm a sinner and I need Jesus in order to get to heaven and not go to heaven. And in my 4-year-old brain, I somehow clicked with it. And as it relates to the church, now were you discussing the church as well? That's something that's not as familiar with.
Yeah. So the Baptist culture of doing church. Yeah,
it's really interesting. So Sunday morning is viewed as a time of teaching, but mostly a time of evangelism. So the goal is that you invite your friends over. The goal is that you invite people to come to the church building in the hopes that they will hear our gospel presentation. So every single message ends with an invitation to walk forward to the front of the church, pray with the pastor, and receive Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior. That's how they would say it.
Okay.
And so every single service includes an invitation. And most song, you ever heard the hymn "Just As I Am"?
Yes.
Yeah. Every single week they'd sing the exact same thing.
I mean, I'm not opposed to singing the same thing every week. It's a nice song, but
it is a kind of nice song to some degree. But I heard it every single Sunday for the probably first 10 years of my life. So God the Lord. But the organ would play, and at least once a month the pastor would have everyone close their eyes and bow their heads.
Just in case, just to like, because they want people coming forward.
Yes.
Because it's like, okay, let's just lower the bar a little bit.
Yes, exactly. And then he would prime the pump a little bit and say, is anyone here interested in knowing more about Jesus? And so he would ask you to raise your hands with everybody's head bowed and eyes closed. And he would say, yes, I see you up there in the balcony, and yes, I see you here down here. And no one had their hand raised. But he was priming the pump.
You don't know that.
I'm fairly certain that they didn't. I was in the choir loft a couple of times. Nobody's raising their hand. But they'd say that they would in the hopes that someone would genuinely come forward. So evangelistic in its purest sense for them was come to church on Sunday and hear the message from the pastor. And in a traditional church context, especially in the South, and especially before the post-Christian era, we should have had the bingo this week. It would have been good.
Yeah.
That was quite effective. People would come there as a natural respect for the pastor.
Okay.
And there's a respect for what he has to say. And there was a favor in which people would give to a pastor if he gave a call or a challenge. People were inclined to agree or respond to that more so than today.
Okay.
So Sunday morning, Sunday night, I was in church. Typically prayer meetings on Sunday nights. Mm-hmm. So I remember from a little kid, I'd turn around in the pew and kneel next to my father, my father was 400 pounds. He was about 3 inches shorter than me. And 400 pounds. He was like you and me stood next to each other. Okay. That's how wide he was. All right. And so my father would get on his knees, which wasn't easy. And he would pray.
In my English Baptist church, there was no kneeling ever.
Really, that was considered.
That's considered too high church.
Really,
no kneeling.
And there was a high. I mean, I grew up believing that Catholics were dying and going to hell.
Believing they're not.
I knew you were waiting for it too. I could just see you with that phrase.
Someone should tell King Henry VIII, Elizabeth I. Someone should tell them.
So I grew up believing that pretty much the only people that were securely going to heaven were Baptists because they did it the right way. Methodists were maybe. Most Methodists weren't going.
Okay.
Maybe some.
Presbyterians?
No.
Because they drank alcohol, right?
Yep. Okay. It was alcohol, and they did the whole sprinkling thing, and lots of mysticism, and that's what I was told.
Mysticism in the Presbyterian church?
Yes.
Oh, sweetheart. You ain't seen nothing. You ain't seen nothing.
It's nuts. It was nuts. So Baptists were the way to go. The Baptist church we went to was one of the 100 largest churches in the country in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And it was started by a pastor named Herbert Fitzpatrick. Mm-hmm. Well, he actually took it over when it was about 15 people. Okay. This will be interesting. You'll like this. So he started the largest church in Kentucky, in the country at the time. And this was in the 1940s. 1949, he started the church in Kentucky. Had that for 2 years, passed that off to a pastor. He came here to start a church. It was like 10 or 15 people. And he came there in like 1950 or 1951. And good old Herb Fitzpatrick, everybody, including his wife, called him pastor. She said, well, Pastor and I are going to plan, and we'll come see. His wife called him pastor. Very interesting.
Is your wife going to be pastor?
Yes.
Yeah, sure, right?
Absolutely.
So what was that, Rachel?
What?
What did you just say?
What?
That's right, it's pastor.
Exactly.
That's biblical manhood right there.
Exactly. Oh, come on. Come on. Come on.
Yes. Yes.
When we're in front of other people, I make her call me
Okay.
Reverend.
And walk behind you 2 paces, right?
Absolutely. And only wear a dress below her ankles.
Mm-hmm. I wear a dress below my ankles.
You do in the cast.
It's called a cassock, but it's a dress that goes below my ankles.
Oh my gosh. Anyway, he came to Maryland. Started this church in Largo, Maryland called Riverdale Baptist Church.
Mm-hmm.
And they lived in a community in Largo, had a small little church building at the time. I think it met in a one-room schoolhouse.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is really fascinating. So what he used to do is every week, he used to walk around the neighborhoods. Everybody lived in the neighborhood. I went to the church. He used to knock on their doors and say, hey, let's go to church. And so he'd go around in a circle in his neighborhood, and the circle ended at the church. So he would get up early, and he would go knock on the door and say, hey, you ready to come to church? And they'd be ready. They'd be in a suit and tie with their kids. And he'd start walking down the middle of the street. And by the time he got to the church building, he had 50, 60, 75 people. So you get a knock on your door every morning. If you remember that church, you get a knock on the door to go to your local community.
I love that.
It's awesome.
I just think that's the sweetest thing.
I mean, it's in the 50s, and it's like, what must that have been like to have experienced that?
A certain localized intimacy of community.
Exactly.
I haven't got to go anywhere for this.
And so there was a
like
procession.
someone's gonna come out and find me.
Yeah, there was.
Isn't that just really wonderful?
It's beautiful, and I just love how that's the foundation of this church. And there would be a procession, and there would be like an experience where he would get the keys out and open the door, and they'd walk in, and he'd teach Sunday school, and he'd preach sermon.
That's amazing.
And everybody would disperse home, but they all walked in. That's how they started the church. So they bought a property in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. And it was like 60, 70 some odd acres. And one day, as they were building the church building, he walked around the property, and him and his wife were walking around. Massive, massive property. And they uncovered an old dilapidated fence. And they had bought this property never having seen this fence before. It was way overgrown. And they found like iron swords from like the Civil War there.
No way!
Like crazy. But they found this fence, and they walked through this fence. It looked like a picket fence, like that was over 100 years old. They walked through, and they uncovered this courtyard. And then beyond the courtyard, they uncovered a huge mansion that's on the property. And it was a manor that had a tree growing up right through the middle of it. And so it hadn't been touched in probably over 100 years. And I think they dated it back to the late 1700s. Wow. And so that became the parsonage. So they claimed it. The American Historical Society deemed it a historical landmark. And so they came in and donated some money for it to get cleaned up. So that's actually the parsonage there today is the home that was built in the 1700s. It's kind of crazy. So
they're not putting out any calls, are they?
You would love it.
Oh.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. I don't think you want to be in this church. So that's the kind of church context I grew up in.
Uh-huh.
Sunday school, Sunday morning church. My parents would sing in the choir, and I'd sit next to some older people that were my adopted grandparents. Because all four of my parents' died before they were born. My mom and dad's parents died before I was born. So yeah, my parents sang in the choir Sunday morning, Sunday night, and then Wednesday night was like the midweek service. And so they'd be preaching there. And my dad was the head of the deacons. My dad was the head of the trustees at one point in time. He was the head of the mission board, which was kind of a big deal. So my dad would go around and meet with people and organize volunteers and just do the functions of the church.
Wow.
Yeah. So and I got saved when I was 4 years old there. I knew who Jesus was, and I came to a faith in him there. And the very next week I was baptized. Because Baptist. Can't wait 1 week.
Yeah.
Have to have it done.
Yeah.
So on my 5th birthday. And then when I was 7 years old, I was there at some sort of revival service or some sort of evangelist.
What's a revival service?
Where you will bring someone in to speak at your church, and they're typically like a Thursday night, a Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night service, where he would preach on different topics. But this would be a big push for evangelism, where you would invite all of your friends, come hear this guy speak. Typically, he came out of a very negative background with drugs or alcohol, or he had some tragic story that he would share in the hopes that people would come to know who Jesus was. And so you'd invite all your neighbors and friends, and there would just be this big push to invite people to come to revival services.
Okay.
So there's this guy, his name is Tim Lee, and he was sharing his story, and had a call to people and asked them. He had 2 altar calls, again, where they call you up front.
But it's Baptist church, no altar.
Yeah, I know, right? That's what they call it, altar call.
All right. But the Catholics are going to hell. Okay.
I know, it's nuts. Oh.
Did you cuss on our podcast, Josh?
I did not. I said, crap. That's what I said. I had the filter out. Yeah, I should.
I've tagged it on YouTube as clean lyrics.
No cussing. Okay. So I actually felt God calling me to be in ministry when I was 7 years old.
Okay.
This revival service. Kind of crazy. Had no clue why that was, but I was just like, that's what I'm going to do with the rest of my life.
Okay.
So coupled with that call, very young, was a root of evil and idolatry in my life that I wasn't able to uncover until just a few years ago, and that was this idolatry of ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Mind you, I had no clue what my dad prayed for me for quite a long time, so that wasn't guiding my life. But I just felt like, well, this is what I'm going to do with my life. What are other people going to do with my life? With their lives, you know? Like, what are other people going to do? And I felt always like an outcast. So, you know, when all the other kids would play, I kind of wasn't playing with the other kids. I always felt like an outcast. I always felt like I was never chosen. I never fit in. So that was like the bulk of my growing up.
Because this ministry was such an idol, so set apart, so different.
Well, and I was a bunch of things. One was I kind of matured faster for my age because I was only ever around adults. So I didn't have any siblings. Both my parents had no siblings, and all 4 of my grandparents died before I was born. And so I had no aunts, no uncles, no cousins, no nothing. And my only experience with other kids was at church or at school. And I felt like very much, so I only engaged with adults for the bulk of my growing up. I didn't play by myself or I'd be around adults. And so I always felt like weird around kids my age. I never got along with kids my own age. I always gravitated towards having older friends when I was in high school. Yes, I never was picked on any teams. I was never chosen for anything. I always kind of felt like I was an outcast my entire life. And I think looking back, some of that was my upbringing, but also some of that was, I remember one very distinct memory when I was in like 3rd or 4th grade of watching kids kick around the ball, and I thought to myself, what are they doing with their life? What? That's so harsh. What 3rd or 4th grader thinks that? But that's just kind of what I thought in my life. I had no clue why I thought that.
And because you're in a conservative Christian background, you didn't have the Cure or the Smiths
to give voice to my angst.
To give voice to your angst. like the rest of us did.
I know, right?
So you just sat there stewing in your religious angst.
For many years.
When I first met you, you were wearing...
Oh, don't you? Yeah. I know. Yeah, go ahead.
A button-down shirt with a black sweater vest.
I call those my sweater vest wearing days. And they are long gone.
They're long gone.
But my wife keeps trying to get rid of the sweater vest. I told her no.
Just in case? Well, just in case?
I'm going to bring it back one day. It's going to be legit when I bring it back.
You were such an angry person. Like,
I was.
I mean, like, you looked kind of adorable in them. Like, you know, who doesn't look cuddly in a sweater vest? But you were not. You were not cuddly.
Yeah, what
you
that
were
guy?
Frightening.
Yeah. And and here's the deal. Unchecked pride, arrogance. I had no one around me to bounce ideas off of, to explore things with. I think you're right. There's just a bunch of unchecked arrogance, pride. I went to college when I was 16. Mm-hmm. I graduated with a bachelor's degree when I was 20. I got a master's degree when I was 22. So I thought I was on the right path. I was on the right trajectory. I thought I was just rolling, and I was God's gift to the church when I left seminary. That's not. And I was just a prideful, arrogant, self-focused person.
You were.
Still am sometimes.
There we go.
Better than I was. Not as good as I want to be or will be.
So, can you tell me about, like, what was the big fracas, conflict?
You just ought to use that word fracas, didn't you?
I did, yeah. Conflict, controversy that you remember. What was the smoking issue of growing up conservative Baptist?
It was music, dude.
Okay.
I listened to P.O.D. P.O.D.
Can you sing me a chorus?
No, absolutely not.
I bet you could.
Song, Satellite. That's about all. It's just Satellite.
Okay.
They just screamed it the entire chorus.
Okay.
It's pretty awkward right now. Yeah, it was like they had tattoos, and oh crap, my parents get the big like no-go on that. So they took all my POD CDs away.
They're Christian.
What? They were Christian, but they didn't put cover. Second thing was Pokemon.
Yeah.
So Jerry Falwell came out.
Who's Jerry Falwell?
I love you, Jerry Falwell. Just super conservative, evangelical church leader who would kind of set the tone for if something was bad or good. And he used to have a radio program. And so Jerry Falwell sent out this radio program that Pokemon meant pocket devil. And it was demonic. We had to take it away from our kids. So my dad, with the best of intentions, sat down with me and like tried to explain it to me.
How old were you?
I was 11 or so, 12. And took my Pokemon away. And he said, "I'm sorry to do this."
Cards of the games?
Both. I had cards and the games. So I recently, when I moved to Tennessee last year, I found my Game Boy, it wasn't even color, it was Game Boy Pocket.
Oh, nice.
And it still worked, and it like eats up AAA batteries. So
nice.
I went to a GameStop, and I bought Pokemon. I bought the game for $40. They're like still worth a lot of money now.
Nice.
I bought the red Pokemon, and I played it. And I called my mom on the way home. And my mom has since, like, she's very well-intentioned. My mom has I think, got an understanding of the gospel now and has left some of that fundamentalism and legalism behind. So I called her and said, "Mom, you remember Pokemon?" She's like, "Yeah." I said, "I found my Game Boy, and I bought a Pokemon to redeem a part of my childhood."
Amazing. Amazing.
And my mom and I had a good laugh about it. So, but that was the big smoking issue for me growing up.
So what was going on there, do you think, for them?
I think out of a genuine wanting to raise their child right, they gave into fear. And I think deeper issue there was they didn't understand the gospel. They didn't understand that I always grew up taught you have to believe the gospel to be saved. And then you go and you are discipled and you go to Bible studies and it's head knowledge. And, they do Bible studies in the book of Revelation. And the big thing yeah. And, well, they were dispensationalists. They all had the same views. It was great. They had charts and everything. They were fantastic. 7, 8 dispensations, whatever it was.
Okay, no, we're going to finish up on this cultural thing and then we'll talk about dispensationalism. Again, a very unique American phenomenon.
Yeah. Which I went to a dispensationalist seminary, and I'm actually a part of a church that still adheres to dispensationalism.
Can you please go with the big issue of the cultural war, the burning of products and whatever?
Yeah, so there was a movement. A lot of people would call that today culture war movement. It was the resurgence of conservative evangelicalism, and it was associated with actually Baptists. They were going through. I've since learned, since being part of the Baptist church, that there was a liberal vein of the Baptists that wanted to take things in an extremely liberal direction, seeing the Bible as allegorical and not literal, interpreting the Bible in ways that a lot of people believe would lead to serious heresy. And so there was a resurgence within the Baptist movement of conservative evangelicalism.
Yeah.
And kind of the battle for the Bible.
Yeah.
And so they went back to interpreting the Bible from a liberal perspective. And some of that stuff I think is good. Like some of that stuff I think was beneficial. Along with that, certain leaders like Jerry Falwell rose up to the top to have major levels of influence, in which it was all about we've got to get the conservative, Republican, evangelicals in Congress and the Senate and the presidency to protect our American moral values and the decline of the moral code in America and the decline of the family in America. And that's where abortion and gay rights has kind of set the stage for abortion and gay rights being the two main primary focuses of evangelicalism for the past 15 years. And so, but I think the core of it, at least with my parents, bringing back down my parents' life, and my dad and I talked about this later on in life, but I just don't think that they kind of grasped the truth and the freedom that comes from the gospel. And so I think that they didn't see the gospel as holistic. I think they saw the gospel as simply evangelical, like
evangelistic.
Okay,
so that's fascinating. I think we talked a little bit about this understanding of Baptists as saving America.
Yeah.
That they're wrestling with wanting America to be this new Israel utopia.
Yeah, well, it's the city on a hill. I mean, they literally had this perspective that America and the church in America was a city on a hill shining in the darkness. And so they use that terminology quite literally, thinking that we would be the bastion of Christianity, and God has blessed America, and so we have to hold our values or God will bring judgment to us.
And that so very conveniently falls in line with a certain line of very secular American exceptionalism.
Yeah.
It's a sanctified version of a very secular idea, it seems to me.
Absolutely.
That the Christians of that generation, rather than standing as prophetic witnesses, instead seek to adopt a popular American ideal of the time of being some exceptional people, some kind of unique people amongst all the world. We are the bastions of freedom against the filthy communists.
Yeah.
And it's only with the benefit of history that we understand, that the West was as culpable in violence as the communists during the post-war era.
Which is still something that, especially in the South, people won't believe or acknowledge.
But
it's seen as anti-Christian to be anti-American.
Yeah.
And there's an unfortunate coupling of those two ideas. This led to the Christian, you would pledge allegiance to the Christian flag in Sunday school class. You pledge allegiance to the Christian flag and the American flag. And yeah, it's a crazy coupling. The 4th of July, you would have a processional of American flags come in to your church, and still in the South very much today, there's still this coupling of those two that that kind of looks down on everybody else that's not like you. And I think my parents were very innocent in the sense of their intentions, but I think they fell into that.
Yeah.
But they left that when I became a teenager, and I saw my dad really grasp the gospel, and I saw my mom too, and I saw my dad reading the Bible with more vigor and fervor. I saw him pray with more passion. I saw him speak into people with more grace. I saw him start to heal with some anger things. When he kind of started to grasp that the gospel wasn't just one thing that happens to you and then it's done with, but that principle that Christ has already done the work for you can actually be part of your entire life.
Okay. That's fantastic.
So that's that was my growing up there.
Lots of smoking issues in that then.
There's a lot.
I would argue a little bit of storm in a teacup stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of silly in retrospect.
It is.
And limited.
Yeah.
And I would argue secular in its foundations, like not rooted really in Christian tradition or in gospel, but it's an American, a secular Americanism garbed in Christian dress.
Yeah, it just has a veneer over top, a Christian veneer.
Yeah.
That seemed to slide very well in the post-World War II booming of the economy.
And angst about other parts of the world.
Yes, exactly. And with the rise of the Cold War, nationalism, Americanism, because actually growing up, you don't really learn about anything about historical Christianity beyond the 1800s. Like there's 1800 years of church history that's just almost, it's like Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses to the door.
And then we're straight away to America.
Straight away to America. We're landing in North Seattle.
Okay.
So that's it. So that's me. And just to wrap up my personal story, because I'm really interested, we'll take a smoke break and then I'll jump into your stuff too. Left Bible college, left seminary, thought God was going to the church. And then
you are. You are.
No, definitely not. But couldn't find a job in ministry. Met with these crazy, weird church planters in Annapolis who just started a church. Met them at a Subway right next to the Westin.
Me too.
All right?
That Subway though.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
You met them that was the first time you met those guys?
Yeah, carry on.
Wow. Well, so I met this church planter and the guy who was helping plant the church. And I kind of shared my spiel. Just got out of Bible college, got seminary, want to be a pastor. I'm good to go. I'm ready to roll. If you have a pastor, are you looking for a pastor? To be understandable. And the guy looked at me and said, we have no need for God like you in the church. And I just responded in shock. I was like, what is this guy saying? He said, and then the other guy said, Josh, you got a lot of hard character issues you need to work through before you get a pastor.
I know who those people are.
Yes, you do.
You haven't even run names.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I know who said that. I know who said that.
Yeah. And then they said, have you ever been affirmed by a church? Have you ever your calling affirmed by a body of believers, or did you just believe this since you were a kid? I was like, well, no, I've just kind of believed it since I was a kid. And then they said, if you want us to help you explore whether or not you are called into ministry and whether or not you should be a pastor, go get a job someplace else.
Uh-huh.
Don't work at a church. Come to our church, and we'll let you know when you feel like you're ready to serve. And I sent out 500 job resumes in a 3-month period, and I met them at the end of that 3-month period. And the very next day, I got the only call back for 500 job resumes. I was at a job in Crofton, Maryland, and I was hired on the spot the next day. And I was driving home, and of course, the nature of pride is that you don't listen to other people. So I was like, screw these guys. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know me. They just met me. And you ever read the Chronicles of Narnia?
Yeah.
Remember Eustace who turns into a dragon?
On your bingo sheet, cross off C.S. Lewis.
Exactly. We didn't hit him last week, but we got him this week. Remember when Eustace turns into a dragon?
Mm-hmm.
Remember he has to peel his own skin off and he can't. Dragon skills. And Aslan comes and he rips him apart.
Yeah.
That honestly is the best description I can say of what happened in my heart when I was driving home that day. The Lord, I felt, was one of the strongest senses of God's presence I've ever felt in my life. And it happened as I was driving home from that meeting.
You're about to sense of, right?
I know, right? Now, I guess I did. But I really strongly felt like God was like, dude, you're saved and you're secure, but you've got a lot of work to do. And I just kind of saw my heart filleted open, and I was like, I've got a lot of stuff I got to work on. And the very next day, I got a job, hooked up with these church planters in Annapolis, and last year, the very same guys that sat across from me in Subway, saying, you got a lot of hard characters, you got a lot of things you got to work on. We don't need a guy like you at our church. We'll let you know when we feel like you're ready to serve. But the same men that ordained me, they put their hands on me and ordained me for ministry as pastor.
Wonderful. Well, thank you.
So it was a rough 5 years of development, but and still being developed. You know? But that's a little bit of my story.
Thank you.
Smoke break?
Mm-hmm.
All right. What are you thinking? What do you smell?
It reminds me of a polished tabletop.
Okay.
In a strange kind of way.
That's good.
No bitterness on my lips or tongue. No sourness, really. Quite sweet. Bready, in a way.
Okay. Yeah.
very different to Last Week's Smoke.
Yeah.
Just so different. Mild, compelling, comforting.
This is a traditional cigar.
Yeah.
Like this is just, I feel like every man's cigar.
Yeah.
I sense a little bit of leather. Lots of wood notes.
Yeah.
Again, dark wood. No pepper. Nope. There's no spice. It's just, this is just tobacco.
Yeah.
Like that's no other way to say it. If you were to just get tobacco in your hand, tobacco in your hand to smell it, it's exactly what this is. So there's no frills. It's just, and it's strong. It packs a punch. It's, it's pretty small.
I can feel it. I can feel it getting strong. It's good. It's making my stomach turn a little bit.
That's good.
Yeah.
If you don't leave a little queasy after smoking issues, I don't think we've done our job.
No, I was queasy last week, but that was
you were red in the face. You were red in the face. Right. So about you growing up, your story, how you started.
Yeah. So my upbringing was not involving the church. My mother had a faith of sorts, but we weren't churchgoers. So my only real knowledge of Christianity was attending church on Remembrance Sunday. Remembrance Sunday is the Sunday closest to November the 11th, Armistice Day.
Wow. Okay.
And it's a memorial of particularly the First World War, but it's kind of evolved to include Second World War and subsequent wars.
Gotcha.
Since typically remembering the dead and the sacrifice of war. And so my parents used to bring me along to that every year, because it was seen as the proper thing to do when you live in rural England.
Interesting.
When you live in sort of suburban, semi-rural England, the proper thing to do is to go along to the parish church for Remembrance Sunday.
So there's a sense of nationalism there as well,
and a certain melancholy too, because in that tradition of Remembrance Sunday services, you often have readings from some of that World War I poetry, which is typically very pacifist. That post-World War I poetry tradition is very pacifist, anti-war, acknowledging the pain and the hardship and the contradictions of the First World War. So for us in England, the First World War was a huge turning point, because it was the final overthrow of the aristocracy. The First World War, unlike the Second World War in many ways, was a war of the aristocracy. That the rulers, the lords, the kings of Europe rallied people to go and fight for them. And it was such a massive failure, loss of life, military inaction and incompetence, that this was the last time the old deferences to that elite group of people finally ended at that point, because it was like, you've let us down. You've led us into this war, and millions of us have died.
Wow.
And a whole generation of up-and-coming young men and women, particularly young men, who would have been, the next generation of aristocracy. They were sent out to be the officers. They all died. A whole crop of the next generation of leaders died. There's a huge cultural transformation, cultural shift happened, which I think is why, unlike many other wars which have been very destructive, this war is memorialized through the Remembrance Sunday service. So I went on to that, but I first got to know some Christians in high school. Now, it may come as a total shock. I was not cool in high school.
Oh, really?
Really, I was not cool in high school.
Totally surprised.
Totally surprised. I was not a cool kid. I was becoming pretty bad.
Because the cool kids, they seem to fit in. Did you only wish that you could be like the cool kids?
I wish that I could be like the cool kids. All the cool kids, they seem to fit in. I burned that CD. I don't know about you.
Oh, definitely. It happened.
I burned that CD. Anyway,
along with my classic rock CD.
Yeah. So I, not a cool kid. I think I'm pretty bad. I mean, to put this in some perspective, I want a very distinct memory of being in the locker room, changing room, after swimming, and one kid saw fit to take my towel away, and then another kid pushed me on the ground, and they hit me and kicked me whilst I was naked on the floor of my of the locker room. I was 13.
That's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite awful.
So, it was kind of me and the remnant of awkward kids would hang out in the library at lunchtime.
In the library, yeah.
Having fun is hard when you've got a library card.
That's funny.
So there I was, and this friend of mine.
That must have been an incredibly challenging.
Well, I would walk into school with an anxious knot in my stomach of just fear, and every single interaction with other students, I was terrified. I was like, something bad is going to happen to me.
Sounds like a form of PTSD.
Now, I'm not going to medicalize my own past.
Right. But that's what it. I mean, it sounds like that's a consistent, reoccurring because of trauma or.
Yeah, like every single day, this fear of someone's going to say something that I don't know, that I'm going to struggle with. They're going to put me down in some way, or physical violence on me.
I'm so sorry to hear that. That's
in many ways I didn't help myself, but I didn't know any better.
Right.
You got what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I was just a kid.
Yeah.
But I was good at class, wasn't good at sports. Obviously.
You hung out in the library.
I hung out in the library. I wasn't kicking the ball around in the playground. But there was a group of Christians who came into Melbourne High School every Thursday lunchtime. And they ran a lunchtime club which involved snacks, games, conversations. And it was an organization called Crossover.
Crossover.
Can you tell us an evangelical organization? Crossover.
What could that possibly mean?
What could that possibly mean? So it was connecting local schools with local churches.
Yeah.
So this volunteer would go in, and what he would do is he would go, a man called Dean Such, he's a wonderful man, he's still a good friend of mine. He would go to local churches, he would recruit volunteers to come with him into local high school, lunchtime clubs, run a very simple program of teaching, games, snacks. And I would build a community that would meet in the local high schools. And then off the back of that, there would be retreats.
Yeah.
Once or twice a year, and other events and stuff. And it was through my relationship with this community that I began to understand the truth of Christian faith. That there was some remarkable difference about these people in their love, their investment, and their conviction. And the excellent way they treated other people. It was extremely compelling to me that taught me there was a truth in their preaching. Awesome. That I could believe that what they were saying was true because they lived it. And then after a couple of years of that, when presented with a gospel invitation.
Oh, see, there you go.
It's everywhere. At a weekend retreat, where indeed we close our eyes and raise our hands.
That's great. Did they make you come forward or throw a stick in the fire? Both?
That came later.
Okay.
I made a decision to follow Jesus at that time. That's the bit that I understood him, because I was so compelled and so sure of the fact that there was a truth to the preaching of this group.
Because of the actions of that.
Yeah. Because the life that they lived and they led was so compelling to me. It was a beautiful life. A life of beauty, of grace, and of love. And I was like, well, somehow Jesus has something to do with that. Jesus makes that possible for them. So when given the opportunity to follow, I said, okay. And so I started attending my local church, where I got baptized a couple of years later. The pathway of like growth in faith in this organization was really kind of leadership stuff. So you're put in charge of running things, helping organize things, helping teach, helping facilitate. It's kind of like it's the standard youth work track of how you bring someone along. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Question for you: when you had that experience when you were a teenager, how did that impact you with your family? Because you had mentioned that you and your mom would go once a year, and then you started going to church frequently. So how did that translate into family dynamics?
Well, at first, my mother was very skeptical.
Okay.
Because the church where I started attending, my local church, it was they used the word happy clappy church.
That's actually really awesome.
It's a really common English expression, actually. We're just describing like contemporary band Christianity,
and it's pretty negative. It's a
derisive term.
But when I hear that, I think that's actually kind of sweet.
No, it's kind of
it's kind of cute.
It's very scornful and derisive.
Okay. When I hear happy class, they're happy and they're fine.
We're not happy clappy people, Josh.
I'm a happy clappy person. I don't know about you.
We produced the Smiths and the Cure, so I think you'll know. Shine, Jesus, shine.
And it's like, and how white people clap is. Oh crap! I missed it again. And you're just waiting for the snare to go down. It's like you never quite get it.
Final chorus, raise your hand. Just one for a long bit. My mother was somewhat skeptical, but I began attending, and was baptized, and she was very kind of supportive.
Supportive of that.
Yeah, largely. Even a little skeptical. She kind of like had a picture of Christianity, which was rooted in her upbringing in inner city London, which was just so different to suburban middle class England. Okay. So it's a little bit like a bit of a dissonance for her.
What was can you describe that? Do you know what that is? I'd be kind of curious.
I'm still not sure, okay. To be honest, but I can imagine perhaps a slightly austere Methodist chapel and some Wesley hymns.
Very conservative, right?
In terms of reserved. So sort of a very reserved Methodist chapel. I know my grandfather was a secretary of Methodist Church. So I'm imagining a sort of a very austere Methodist chapel with a fiery circuit preacher coming on the preaching schedule. Wesley hymns and the whole shebang. Yeah, that's what I'm imagining. But I don't really know, to be honest.
Interesting. And then you went to the Happy Clappy Church while also listening to the Smiths.
I didn't get into the descent. I was more of a Korn kind of kid.
Oh no, you weren't.
I was.
Are you serious?
Korn, Slipknot, Michael McGraw Band.
God.
I
can't even imagine you listening to that stuff.
It's awful.
I literally never thought that you would listen to that.
Oh, absolutely.
Are you serious?
It's so bad.
Did you paint your fingernails black?
I did.
Dude.
I did, yeah.
That's great.
Everything I owned was black.
Yes! I went through that phase too.
Yeah, we were there. It turns out, in my vocation, everything else I'm going to wear is going to be black too. Just a white collar just here, but everything else black.
And that white collar just shines, right? It's just like
dripping in black.
Just brilliant white collar.
Yeah.
And otherwise completely black. You would disappear in the night.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Like Jack the Ripper.
Yeah. So, I was quite keen, enthusiastic, didn't improve my social situation. Turns out, becoming a born-again evangelical at 14 years old
doesn't quite help you with the ladies.
Worst time. Worst time for that to happen.
Yeah.
Really. Like when you're like between 5 and 10, it's fine. When you're in college, it's fine. But the intervening years, was it ever rough?
So it got your trajectory at school and got worse.
In many ways. But in that time, what I discovered was that when Jesus promised that his followers would be a family, I discovered that was indeed the case. Which is why, to this day, I have an extremely high theology of the church as a spiritual body, which is a legitimate and true family. True in the truest sense of the word. It is a family, and it was there for me, and it's still there for me. And so I, understand where I come from now to be the church. That's my origin story.
Yeah.
So that's where I belong. And that was a huge, something that really saved me when I was in high school.
Now, were they, the bullying increased because they found out that you were a Christian, and they kind of used that to pick on you, or they kind of used that as an excuse?
Yeah.
Another excuse.
Yeah. I was not short of excuses to pick on me.
Yes, I said another.
I was not short of reasons to pick on me at high school. But I was working a job. I was cleaning dishes at a local restaurant, and it was coming to the end of my high school career. And when I was walking home from work, I believe I heard a voice from the Lord.
Oh, okay.
And that voice said one thing to me: "You will study theology."
Really?
Yeah. You will study theology.
How old are you?
16, 17.
That's awesome.
So that shaped how I was thinking about my career in university. And my mind was thinking, okay, I want to go do a good theology course somewhere, but really I want to be carrying on doing ministry things. So my understanding of ministry was very much parachurch lay, no conception of ordained paid ministry. I didn't care.
Because that was your experience.
Yeah. My experience was evangelistic parachurch organizations who are in the midst of the people,
right?
Doing ministry, caring for people, reaching out, telling them the gospel, loving people. I thought I want to be doing that, with my university career. I have no intention of stopping. But I had a teacher in high school who was, aside from being an English teacher, was also a Methodist lay preacher and also a youth pastor.
Okay.
So this individual was busy. But she turned me on to this college up in Derbyshire called Cliff College, where she had taken some of her kids on various youth retreats. And so I went and visited there. And when I was showed around, I had this profound sense of this is home. So obviously in this time of my faith, I was very much a feeling, intuitive, kind of charismatic person. Of that's what I was looking for. So I signed up to this college and went. My parents struggled with that.
Really?
It wasn't a normal university. It was like Hogwarts.
To them.
To them, it was like a remote building in the middle of the countryside. It was a gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous property. It's a beautiful place to spend a couple of years. Kind of cloistered in many ways, and they send me on mission twice a year.
Did they also give you a wand when you checked in?
It comes from Ollivanders. You arrive with your wand. So
they also give you a book of an ancient book that you read and study and memorize.
Right, exactly.
I'm still drawing the connections here.
Yeah, really. Connection. No robes though. They're very low church Pentecostal.
Oh well, that's a shame.
No robe at all. It's a real shame. That's a real shame. But so I went there, and I got involved in the ministry, learned the ministry there, and I ended up signed up to a preaching class. And I discovered that one of the stipulations of a preaching class would be that I would actually be sent out to preach in local Methodist chapels.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah, I had no idea.
That's great.
So
that's the typical bait and switch.
Yeah, so I started this preaching class, right? And my first sermon that I ever wrote and preached was in the book of Habakkuk.
That's great.
As you can tell, I grew up listening, in teenage years, listening to My Chemical Romance.
Yes.
Every day,
Yeah.
definitely helps.
Were your fingernails still painted black?
Not this time.
Your toenails were. Ian just gave me a coy wink. You can't see that, unfortunately.
So I preached my first sermon on Habakkuk.
How'd that go? How did you feel getting up there?
It was actually a really good sermon. I mean, to this day, I was pretty pleased with the way I interpreted it, because unlike I've always had this rebellious streak, as Josh will know, where everyone was preaching very safe evangelistic messages.
Matthew 5 or John 1.
Yeah, safe evangelistic messages. This is the gospel. You should believe in the gospel. While I was wrestling through Psalms and Old Testament prophets, whilst also listening to death metal.
Death metal now. So we graduated from My Chemical Romance to death metal.
And everything in between.
The deeper you read the Psalms, the more metal you got.
Yeah, really. And I had this this affinity with these devastating Old Testament writings. But I found such truth in them and such comfort and consolation and challenge that I wanted to explore these things. So I preached on that, and I actually won the preaching award that year.
Good job.
Yeah.
It is ironically still on the wall for everyone to see.
I know I'm so proud of that award because the man who gave it to me is still a phenomenal preacher, an incredible man. He taught me Lowry's homiletical plot, Fred Craddock, some amazing preaching texts. So, got into ministry through that. I think, and then through that experience, I was put in an internship in the US. Through that internship, I got to meet Joey, met him in the subway. Next to the Westin. And he invited me to come and serve with his church.
That was when Downtown Hope was at Studio of the Arts.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the same time I joined.
Yeah. A little bit about me. What would you ask?
Well, tell me a little bit about how you process what happened to you as a teenager with being bullied has shaped your perspective of the gospel and Jesus and the sufficiency for you today.
Well, I think one of the things I really missed out on was the fact that my life of faith was living in the half-life of my trauma.
Expound on that.
So, profession of faith and all that kind of stuff. But actually, in many ways, I was still a stunted, traumatized teenager. And coming to terms with that, coming to find any peace in that, there was a huge amount of resentment toward God. Because there's this feeling of like I'm sick, I'm somehow not well.
Yeah. Like you're not whole.
I'm not whole, I'm not well. I'm not, there's something missing for me. And I blamed God. I was so angry. Because I had no other way of understanding what happened to me. Other than saying, well, God, you did this to me.
Why did you allow me to experience these things or be this way? Feeling like an outcast can make you sometimes doubt what's wrong with you. Yeah.
I felt like something deeply wrong with me.
Interesting.
And I hated myself quite deeply. Oh, quite deeply. That eventually that self-hatred caught up with me, and that meant that my spirituality dried up. So coming from a spirituality that was very much about the gospel, salvation, progress, going somewhere, and suddenly these wounds of my childhood snare me. And that story of faith, that simplistic, evangelistic, evangelical story of faith, is no longer true for me. I'm not going to diagnose myself with any mental illness because I'm not qualified to do that. But some people might have seen that at that time. Some sort of depression, something, I don't know.
Gotcha.
But I'm not prepared to. I would never make that diagnosis about myself. But I had this angst and pain and fear and anger. I blamed God for various things, and then of course my prayer dried up. I left the statement after a certain point. Inarticulate yearnings and groanings and pains. So at that point, after when I was kind of like at the end of that evangelical charismatic trajectory, once that language of inner healing, perfection, had all failed me, I was like, okay, how can I have a relationship with God
if I don't experience full healing?
Yeah. If this is how I am forever, if I'm not going to change in any way, how on earth can I experience God?
Gotcha.
Well, as it turns out, the bulk of Christian worship for the bulk of the church's history has not been so experientially reliant. Yeah. It doesn't rely on me having any progress or unique experience or discernible progression or growth or healing. This is worship that is written down in a book for me to participate with and offer. This is why my spirituality, my worship, my leadership is rooted in liturgical tradition, because it has enabled me to offer worship that does not judge me.
Yeah.
Worship that doesn't expect me to be different than I am.
Come as you are.
Come as you are. Read these words. That's all. And something profoundly liberating about that. I haven't got to sing 3 choruses, get my arms in the air and cry. I've got to say 3 lines, get on my knees and pray. Very different.
Yeah.
Very liberating. So much less judgmental. And, evangelical charismatic leaders, they'll never judge you with their mouths. There's all the heavy-handed manipulation of where you should be, and a subtle judgment of your character and conduct and faith. But when you're coming together around a shared worship, there's no room for that judgment, because everyone can participate in the same way. It completely frees you from a leader judging you.
See, I never had this perspective. Like, this is
that
perspective is really beautiful. How old were you when you were going through that crisis? And
21.
And when did you come out of that, or not even come out of that, but when did you find this renewed sense of trust and faith?
I think it was after I left university and began attending my local parish church, where every week I could come and offer worship, and my feeling of self-worth did not have any impact on my experience of the worship. Because it's like, you come, you offer this worship, you go.
It's not sensationalist.
What?
That's not sensationalist.
Yeah, no ecstatic, nothing ecstatic, no sensationalism. Like, you come, you offer this worship, and you're assured you're reconciled with God because you've confessed your sins, you've heard the gospel, you've taken the Lord's Supper.
Yeah. You
walk away. Yes, you are now reconciled with God.
There's a beautiful simplicity in that.
Yeah. That slowly eroded away my hate. Just washed it away.
So awesome.
Absolutely, just so gently, just washed away that anger and hate. Because no matter how I came, working with the same, and that's such a reflection of God's posture toward us. That this worship reflects in some way God's character, His patience and forbearance. So you can come off with this worship that doesn't judge you. And that's a reflection for me of God's character toward me, God's posture toward me, and that I found kind of liberating and saving to my soul. When at one point, it was like, the crisis of faith of, this story of faith that I was told, holiness, Pentecostal, charismatic understanding, when that was false, when that was no longer true for me, I found a whole spiritual language that I could carry on with, where I could have a relationship with God that was patient. Yes,
it's beautiful. There's a beauty in how you described it. It's this element of simplicity and of faithfulness too. Like, come, read these words, pray, and through that faithful trajectory and consistency, God will change you. Not come experience these big things. So you feel changed. That's a pretty powerful thing to experience at that juncture in your life.
Very important at that time.
Well, that brings, I haven't quite heard that. That brings a lot more depth to when we talk about the church and liturgy. And how much that has impacted you in the Lord because that's changed your life. It makes a bit more sense now.
And for some people, liturgy is a hobby and a curiosity and a fad. Indeed, many evangelical leaders are using liturgy as a kind of fad at the moment. You'll see it. Everyone sees it at the moment.
Sure.
But for me, it's like, well, this is what the Lord has provided through His Holy Spirit to His church. How He's going to sanctify His people. And God's invitation is, will you let these words shape you and mold you? And will you be patient with that? Will you submit? Will you humble yourself?
And isn't that the trajectory of the gospel?
Well, I think so. I think it's more true to the gospel than a rock concert liturgy of selling you a product. That's what I think.
Genuineness there. We're approaching the end of our cigar, my friend. How is it? How's the end?
Getting a little sour. Very consistent though. It's a really consistent smoke.
The entire smoke was the same until the very end. Now it's getting a little bit bitter. I feel a little bit of bitterness on the back of my tongue and a little bit of like ashy smokiness because we're like, it's really hot. Because we're getting to the very end.
This has been a great smoke. Get out and compare.
For those on the podcast, we were holding up our stogies to the webcam.
Any last minute thoughts or questions for me?
Where do you see yourself? What's your goal? What's your trajectory in terms of your career? And what you're doing here, and explain maybe for a minute what you're doing here in Annapolis, and what your goal.
Well, I'm here in Annapolis because I was called to serve here. That's why I'm here, because the people and pastor and people outside of this church in this city wanted me to be here and serve. So I'm responding to that, and I'm being patient with how the Lord provides for me. I live by faith, so the bulk of my income is from supporters and donors. I serve by mentoring and caring for individuals, and also by offering input at some church concerns and concerns broadly between churches in this city, particularly amongst mission and ministry to the urban poor. And also this year, I'm also starting doing some outreach on the two college campuses in the city, St. John's and the Naval Academy. Because people have seen something in me and invited me to come and serve. So I'm like, all right. My posture has always been, if you're going to call me, I'll come.
That's awesome.
So
never say no to an invitation.
Right. 2 rules of my ministry. This is why I've gotten so far. Is I'll never say no to an invitation, and I'll always answer an honest question sincerely.
It's good.
It's a good principle to have.
Yeah.
It's good. Well, you've done so much good work in the city, connecting with pastors and across denominational lines and perspectives. That's been a huge asset to Annapolis as a whole. For those listening who might be in the South or maybe overseas, it's a very different culture here in the city of Annapolis. and Ian, you can probably speak more to this because I've been out of it for a year.
Yeah.
But pastors huddle together for warmth here, a lot more so. They understand the need for community because there's not a church on every corner, and there's not a level of cultural Christianity in the culture at large where people are used to coming to church. So I find that people are a bit more honest here with where they are and where they need to go. And isn't that a beautiful thing? Never say no and always answer an honest, what was it? Always answer a
sincere question, honestly.
Sincere question, honestly.
Or honest question, sincerely.
It's good. It's good.
Yeah.
Well, my wife and I, when we moved to the South, our goal has always been, our prayer has always been over our house, that our house would be a place of peace.
Yeah.
For people to come and for people to have a safe space.
Yeah.
Where they can be themselves, where we can explore questions, we can explore honest questions.
Is that a safe space? Is that a space safe, like no trigger words?
Like, give me an example.
Oh no, like you know, where there's a controversy of like safe spaces on university campuses and whatnot.
No.
And like warning people of trigger warnings in a lecture.
No.
Oh, we can talk about that in the future.
All right, talk about that. We got to talk about that later. No, but we've always prayed that our house would be a house of peace, and so we're building a house right now, and we had an opportunity to meet our neighbors the other day at a pool party, and found 3 people that like to smoke cigars.
Nice.
And so we have a cigar time set up next week to go smoke and engage with our neighbors. But I think that's
as an ordained minister, you know what you should do? You should bless the foundations of your house. That.
Really?
Yeah, tons of it.
You should send them to me.
Yeah,
I'd love to do that.
Like,
because they poured the footer for our house.
Yeah.
This past week.
I mean, I believe, you know, I'm a broad Catholic. I have anybody who's a validly ordained minister is ordained to me, and that comes with certain responsibilities and authorities that I don't think lay people have. And I think you could go and bless your own house.
That's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we definitely we had a prayer time at every house we've been to.
Oh yeah.
Since Rachel and I have been married, we've had time of prayer before we moved in, asking Lord to let our house be a place of peace. And my wife's ministry has been more to those who are sick and caring for their physical needs. But Ian, like, thank you so much for opening up and sharing. Like, it's good to I learned stuff about you I didn't know when we started the conversation.
Yeah, wow.
And
cool.
And it's good. I think both of our lives, the trajectory after I came to Downtown Hope was I started in a men's group at 5:30 in the morning, and started reading the Bible genuinely for myself. And I found that to the degree of that there was a simplicity to it, where I wasn't studying the Bible to understand the nuances of Greek and Hebrew, and the structural outline, but I just read it to read it to be transformed by it. And in a similar fashion as you, that's what I feel like the Lord used to shape my life and my experience.
Yeah. Right.
Seems like there's a lot of similarities there, and I think probably our listeners have had those too. Whether if you're a person of faith or you're not a person of faith, but I know with people who have come to know Jesus at a younger age, there's typically a crisis point or moment that they re-encounter faith in a new way. Yeah. And we continue to pray for this.
Yeah.
Pray for people that we minister to have this.
Well, thank you, Joshua.
Thank you, my friend. We got to thank our executive producer, Nazmo King.
Thank you, Nazmo.
Thank you, Nazmo.
Thank you.
And we'll see you guys next week. Thanks so much for joining in.
Bye.